Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, there's celebrations in the streets of Algiers after Algeria's ailing leader, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, drops his bid to run for a fifth term in office. The plan had sparked weeks of protests, but the vote's been postponed and no new date has been set. And there's mourning across Ethiopia for the 157 people killed in the Boeing 737 MAX 8 crash. Victims came from over 30 nationalities, with Kenya bearing the brunt. 2 black boxes have been found, and investigators are hoping that they'll shed some light onto what caused the sudden crash. But first, after weeks of public outcry and demonstrations against his proposed candidacy, Algeria's President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has said that he will not be running for a fifth term in upcoming elections. That vote had been due to happen in April, but Bouteflika's announcement also saw him postpone those polls and promise to hold a referendum on constitutional reform. However, there is, as yet, no date for a new election.
Celebrations in the streets of Algiers as news spread that President Abdelaziz Bouteflika would abandon his bid for a fifth term in office. Elections planned for April postponed. Bouteflika's words were delivered to Algerian media in a letter.
The Independent National Conference will decide the date of the next presidential election, in which I will absolutely not be a candidate.
According to statements from the Office of the Presidency, a new constitution is to be put forth for a popular referendum. Both the Prime Minister and his deputy have resigned. Political and economic reforms also promised. Monday's turnabout sees Bouteflika bowing to public pressure after nearly 3 weeks of street protests on a scale not seen since the country's 1962 independence. Hundreds of thousands have come out for near daily demonstrations, sparked on February 10th when the ailing octogenarian leader ended weeks of speculation with an announcement that he would seek a fifth term after already holding office for 20 years. For many Algerians, it was the last straw. Decades under a secretive power structure have concentrated the country's oil and gas wealth in the hands of a small coterie of insiders, leaving the young population seething amid rampant unemployment and official corruption.
They have stolen the country's wealth. Now it's time to leave opportunities for young people.
Bouteflika's March 3rd promise to set new elections without him if he won in April failed to quell the demonstrations. By Monday, even the country's legal elite and clerics were in revolt. Decades of political inertia now brought to an abrupt end as Algeria looks to a new future without Abdelaziz Bouteflika.
Ethiopia held a day of mourning on Monday for the 157 people who died in plane crash outside of the capital a day earlier. 2 black boxes from the Ethiopian Airlines flight have now been recovered. Flight ET-302 went down in a field on Sunday, shortly after taking off from Addis Ababa for Nairobi. The recorders should help piece together the vessel's final moments. The disaster came just months after another Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet came down in Indonesia. Now, the Ethiopian impact site is still being examined. A committee that will include Boeing, Ethiopian Airlines and transport authorities is being set up to lead the investigation into the crash, but for now, its cause is still unclear. Tom Gardner joins us now with more from Addis Ababa. Tom, how is the investigation proceeding? Has the discovery of the black boxes shed any more light on what happened on Sunday?
Not yet, no. The black boxes are under the custody of the Civil Aviation Authority. Boeing personnel are expected to arrive tomorrow morning, I think. Other international investigators are also joining. What we do know, we know that the maintenance checkup prior to yesterday's flight didn't find any problems. We know that from the reports we have of the flight path after takeoff, that it had this very unstable vertical trajectory, which suggests the pilot might have lost control. We know the pilot asked for clearance about 3 minutes after takeoff, which was granted, clearance to return to Addis Airport. We know the aircraft lost control shortly after this, contact 3 minutes or so after takeoff, and then we have some sort of strange reports from local residents near where the plane landed, describing plumes of smoke and debris, which possibly points to an explosion. But I mean, most of this does look remarkably similar to what happened with the Lion Air a crash in October. An abrupt nosedive, which might have been caused by this updated Boeing software, which is meant to prevent stalling, but can send the plane into a fatal descent. So most of the speculation right now is on the Boeing model, the 737 model, Max 8 model. That's where the questions are focused right now.
And what about its impact on Ethiopia Airlines itself? It's Africa's largest carrier and has had a pretty good record to now. Has this crash affected its operations at all?
Well, I mean, no. The airline it has so far, it has emphatically said to me and to others that operations yesterday as well as today are proceeding as normal, no delays, everything's on schedule. It's business as normal. However, it has done one significant thing, as you mentioned. It's grounded the Boeing 387 Max 8. China, Indonesia has done the same, and a few hours ago, a South African carrier has also done that. So it's a reminder that the questions really in the focus is on Boeing more than the airline at the moment, and Ethiopian Airlines has made it very clear that they don't believe this is the fault of the airline. Obviously, the investigations will determine, but they cite understandably its excellent safety record. It's a 4-star global carrier, same as Emirates, for example. It's considered to have safety standards matching the top airlines in the world. So there will be concerns about its reputation going forward, but I mean, so long as the investigation sort of exonerates the airline, it should prove resilient.
Thanks very much. Tom Gardner there for us in Addis. Now, the crash has touched families and communities across the continent and beyond. The victims came from more than 30 countries, including Ethiopia, and 22 of the dead were UN staff. Many had been heading for a United Nations Environmental Assembly in Nairobi. At its opening on Monday, delegates held a minute of silence. Meanwhile, in Geneva, the head of the UN Committee for Refugees paid tribute to the ideals and efforts of the men and women who died having spent their lives trying to help others.
The aid community has been particularly impacted by this tragic loss of lives. So it is a very sad occasion, but also an occasion for us to come together to celebrate the lives of generous and devoted and committed people, and to draw from their example the strength to overcome their loss and the energy to continue to work in support of the people we serve.
Now, Canada lost at least 18 nationals, Ethiopia 9, but it was Kenya that bore the highest toll, with at least 32 citizens amongst the dead. Julia Steers brings us more from Nairobi.
There were 32 Kenyans on board Ethiopian Airlines flight ET302 when it crashed on Sunday, killing everybody on board. The mood in Nairobi on Monday was somber, as family, friends, and colleagues recounted in disbelief the names of those lost on this popular flight from Addis Ababa to the Kenyan capital. Cedric Galia Asiavugwa was a third-year law student at Georgetown University in the U.S. He was returning home to Kenya to attend a family funeral. The pilot himself was an Ethiopian Kenyan national. He was an experienced pilot with over 8,000 hours of flying, according to the airline. While Kenya suffered the heaviest losses, there were over 30 nationalities traveling on this flight, which is really indicative of just how popular this route is with business travelers, tourists, and humanitarians who come to Nairobi, which is home to one of the largest UN offices in the world. There were 18 Canadians on board, among them a popular Nigerian-born Canadian writer, along with several Americans, Britons, and French nationals. The UN lost 19 staff members in the accident. They said it was one of the biggest catastrophes the organization has suffered in years. It's thought that there were so many UN staff on the flight who were coming here to Nairobi to participate in a UN environmental conference that started here on Monday. The conference began with a moment of silence.
Well, in Benin, opposition supporters took to the streets of Cotonou on Monday in protest over their exclusion from upcoming parliamentary elections at the end of April. Critics accuse President Patrice Talon of undermining the country's pretty solid democratic history.
Several thousand people turned out to march peacefully in Cotonou, Benin's biggest city, to protest the exclusion of all opposition parties from running in April's parliamentary elections.
We're going to see this through to the end. Without the opposition, there is no election.
We've seen what exclusion has done in other countries. It is a tradition for Beninese to hold elections. You can't mess with that.
Members of the ruling party voted in new laws in Parliament last year responsible for sidelining the opposition parties from the election. New conditions to be met by each party to run for election were meant to clean up the political class, according to the ruling party. The end results excluded all opposition parties.
We want elections, we want to participate, and we want the elections to be held on the right date. We have fulfilled all the conditions, and each time they find a new excuse to keep us away.
Out of the 7 parties that applied to the Electoral Commission, only 2 pro-government parties have been approved. Without the Ministry of Interior's approval, running in the parliamentary election is impossible. To ease tempers, President Patrice Talon called for dialogue between all political parties, an invitation the opposition declined.
My wish, my prayer is that together we can examine ways and means that would possibly allow us to form broader political coalitions.
The opposition's now demanded a revision of the electoral code and for all parties to be officially approved by the Ministry of Interior.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.
En France 24 nos esforzamos por brindar la mejor información hecha por periodistas de Latinoamérica y del resto del mundo.
We look at how technology is shaping the future, and we show you the latest gadgets you can soon get your hands on.
نقدم لكم الاقتصاد بطريقة مختلفة، نبسط المفاهيم والمصطلحات كي تكتمل الصورة لديكم.
Aquí puedo hablar de medio ambiente, no solo de los problemas que afectan a nuestro planeta, sino también de iniciativas y soluciones que a veces no tienen espacio en televisión.
La différence sur France 24, c'est l'idée du reportage. Nos grands reportages, vous ne les verrez nulle part ailleurs.